Hi, everyone. Kelly here. Today I have Samantha Goes from Goes Flute Studio, and Samantha and I are going to be talking about how she built a full-time private flute studio while she was completing her master's degree program, which was a very, very busy time, but she did it. It's been incredible, and I'm excited to have her share a little bit more. So, Samantha, why don't we kick it off with this? Can you just introduce yourself, your studio, and tell us a little bit more about you and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Samantha Goes. I'm a private flute teacher in the Southwest Ohio area, and I also teach online too. And I just graduated in May with my master's, which has been great to be done. But yeah, I teach in the area, and I teach marching band. I teach flute lessons, um, and yeah, that's basically it.
Awesome, awesome. So your program too, you went back to school. So you've had kind of an interesting music career so far. So you did your bachelor's degree, and I believe that was in ed, correct?
Yep.
And then you went on to teach for a while.
Mhm.
And then we cycled back to the master's program. And about halfway through was when you and I met. So we've been working together a little bit over a year now, which is crazy, but it's been a really fun journey through that master's program. And when we met last June, you were in a place where you're looking at what happens after realizing that maybe we didn't want to go back into teaching in a school system again. What were you looking for when we first met, and what did you want the studio to be?
I was really looking to get started on building something before I graduated, so I was set up after I graduated. I already knew that I didn't want to go back into the classroom. I enjoyed my time for 2 years, but after 2 years, I decided it wasn't for me for a multitude of reasons. So I really wanted to set myself up before I graduated, so that way, after I graduated, I wasn't scrambling to find a job that I maybe didn't want, or something like that. And I've been teaching private lessons on and off since I was in high school. I've loved it. I've always known that this is what I've wanted to do full time if I
Mm.
could make it work. So last summer, I was like, okay, it's time to make this work. And that's when we started working together. So.
Awesome. Awesome. What do you feel? And since you have a lot of background in education and a lot of background in pedagogy, not only just in flute, but you have a whole music ed degree, what do you feel makes your student or your approach to teaching flute more unique?
I really aim to teach my flute lessons in a positive, enthusiastic, confidence building environment. I've been in environments myself where it's not been that, and it's not productive. So, yeah, my main goal is to empower my students to influence their music education with input on their own goals and their own interests. So, lessons might look different from student to student. Some students want to be first chair in band at school. Some want to take youth orchestra auditions. Some want to be the next James Galway. I don't know. But then there's other students, on the other hand, who just want to play and just want to have fun playing without the stress of having to be the best. And I really strive to work with all of those students and take their goals and tailor their lessons towards what they want to do. So.
That's fantastic. I know you've done a lot of work too in the last few months, especially around maybe doing some ensembles or like different things with your students, where it's not just private lessons, but you're seeing them in other environments because you're working with them in other environments, like you mentioned band camp, or
Mhm.
you're creating other opportunities for them. What are some of the cool things that you guys have done in the last year with the studio?
So I've been doing two studio recitals a year, one in the spring and one in the winter. I just started doing this last year, so it's still fairly new. But last winter, for the winter recital, we did holiday music and we did only ensemble music, no solos or anything. It was all flute trios, flute duets, quartets, and so on. I really wanted to do that because that's not an experience that I got a whole
Mm.
lot of when I was in school. I got some of it at school, but not necessarily just flute related. So I really wanted to do that. And it was so much fun. And then not only did they get the experience of playing together in flute ensembles, but they got to meet so many new students because my students are all from different schools. It's interesting.
Mm.
Hardly anybody knew each other going into it. So they made new friends, and it was awesome.
That's so cool. And it's something too that creates a better bond to the studio too, right? Now they have friends, but those friends are through the studio. So when you guys do things together in the future, they know each other. It's really comfortable. It's exciting. It's also a very different kind of musicianship to play in a small chamber ensemble like that. So a really fun and unique twist on things. I think it's something that a lot of teachers would love to do. They're just not totally sure how. So it's been fun to see you make that happen too. Looking back at last summer, going way back. So right now, for reference, it's August of 2022. And so we started working together. I think our first couple conversations were right at the very end of June of last year. So it's been a while.
Mhm.
As you were looking at that second year of your master's program, thinking about what was coming after, what did you feel was maybe holding you back from having a more full studio? Or what did you feel was going to be the obstacle that you're trying to overcome and having a more secure income when you graduated?
The biggest obstacle I would say at first is that while I learned a lot in college and I enjoyed my both my undergrad and my grad studies, I learned a ton. Didn't learn anything about this.
Mm, yeah,
That was one of my biggest frustrations going in is that in most university settings, if you're in the standard music education track or the performance track, you don't learn about how to be an entrepreneur in the music field. And there's so many things we can do with our degrees and with our careers, but you just don't learn about them. So that's kind of where I was last summer. I was like, wow, I really just like I've been teaching for a long time. I know how to teach. That part I wasn't worried about. But how do I set up my own business
yeah,
and streamline things and make things more efficient? That is what I was really wanting to learn about. And so that's where I was, and it's been very helpful so far. So
that's awesome. Well, and it was something you were doing actively too. I mean, that's an important point here. You were teaching privately. You had, I think we said about 6 students, right? We need to look back at all of our notes and our records because it has been a while, which is a great problem to have. But at that time, we had about 6 students, and we thought we were maybe doing on average about $500 a month in revenue, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, so definitely not a livable income at that point in time. It was still something which was great. We had a few students that were enrolled in the studio, and I think a lot of those had been coming from one particular source at that time. Correct? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So I have a few band directors in the area as of last summer that I was super close with. Some of them I went to school with.
Yeah,
So they were referring their students to me.
awesome. So we had a couple already lined up, and that's how we found the 6. But we kind of hit a plateau. We actually had 7, and then one was leaving, and so we'd hit kind of a sticky situation, and it wasn't stable because we had some students that would cancel and they wouldn't pay for lessons, and it was a little bit all over the place. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what of that situation? And I know we're at that time we're looking about building a bigger studio. We're thinking about that next step. But at that point in time, what would you say you were most frustrated with the current studio situation and teaching that you had?
I was just most frustrated with it's a great question. I didn't really have a studio policy in place.
Mm,
So things like that happened all the time. It's like, oh, we're going on vacation. I'm just not going to pay you this week. But that, I didn't have that policy. I hadn't had that training or knew what the best thing to have in place was. So that was, yeah, that was the biggest thing. That was like my only problem at that point, other than not having enough students. But at that time, I didn't need teaching to be my full time income because I had the grad
Absolutely.
assistantship. But yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I think, if I remember correctly, because this was a long time ago, I think we met through Facebook. Well, I think we were in groups together and kind of exchanged some messages and then and got on a Zoom call and talked a little bit more. When we started talking about the process of building the studio, what piqued your interest in working with this program in particular?
The biggest thing that piqued my interest was that it was a very easy to follow process. And that is something that I needed. I'm the type of learner I need something black and white, just some, like give me a list of things to do, I'll do it. And so that's what you offered on our first call. And then in addition to that, like other classically trained musicians, we are taught from very early on about the starving artist mindset,
Mm,
which really bothers
yes.
me. And I'm sure it bothers you too and everybody else. But so with that, going in with that mindset, I didn't have the confidence like,
Mm,
oh, that I can do this or that this is sustainable. But having your support, like you gave me that confidence, and having that support was really important to me.
oh, that's awesome. And thank you. It's definitely something that we all are working on together, a little bit of bonding over that stereotype, which is really frustrating, but it's something that we're all working on. And it's
Mhm.
important that, especially as you're going through that last year of school and looking at building the studio, that's a massive workload. I mean, to be promoting your studio and growing it and marketing and doing all of your studies, plus doing all the teaching, and it was growing rapidly, which we're going to talk about in a second. That took a lot of time and energy and effort. And so there were some periods too where we hit the brakes, right? We paused for a second, which is really good too. And it's okay to have seasons where we focus on one more than the other. especially when the goal was to build the studio over time so that it was more full when you graduated. But that's something that takes a mindset shift too, that we don't have to be 100% perfect performance ready in order to take our business to the stage of life, so to speak, that we don't have to be completely done. It's not a recital. We can just keep working on things over time,
Mhm.
and that's perfectly fine. So the last few months, and I know you and I kind of mapped this out quickly. So we started at the end of June and we were saying it was about $500 a month.
Mhm.
By the end of summer, we were doing a little bit more. Do you remember that number? Right, like August, roughly?
Um,
I think
I
we said,
don't. I think it was like 700.
yep. So around 700. So we had some growth, which was great. By November of last year, we had doubled that. So we were around 1,400. So that was kind of in 3 to 4 months of work. We had the income already tripled essentially from what we had started. So we started on the 500. We were a little over 1,400 at that time. After winter break, when we got back into the swing of things, that's when we really got, I think, more serious about building the studio and marketing. So the first part was just let's find a couple students and let's get the studio policies, right?
Hmm.
Second semester, it was go time. We're graduating. So February, we had a few extra students. I think we were around 1,800. When we graduated in May, and I'm literally just reading on the list of numbers that you and I kind of talked about, but in May, when you graduated, we did about 2,200. Looking at August and then September, which we've got some more changes coming to the studio policy and a flat rate tuition, all that good stuff. I think we talked about around 3,000 for September now, correct?
Oh, yeah, just about.
Awesome. That's a massive change in 1 year, especially for a single instrument wind program and being in school at the same time. What has changed for you? I know obviously the income has changed and that's been great, but we also had an assistantship and that has gone away. And so there's been a lot of fluctuation there. But for your life outside of just the finances, how has this impacted you?
I mean, it's been huge, obviously. I mean, on the business side, I've been able to streamline everything and not have to stress about it so much. And I have a system in place and I know exactly what I'm doing. So I'm spending way less time on all of that. So that's been great. So, with that, spending less time on the business and just not being in school anymore, I have so much more time to dedicate to
Mm.
other things. Professionally, I'm able to take more gigs, which is awesome. I actually have two this weekend, which is so random, but I'm excited.
It's so fun.
Yeah, and then I'm able to spend more time volunteering in other organizations that I'm super passionate about. But then obviously on the other hand, I have more time to spend at home with my husband and my family, and that's the most important thing in the world. So yeah.
That's awesome. It does give a lot of time, and we're talking about $3,000 a month of income. I think we said about 14 to 15 students right now is the load there. So most of those students are 45 minutes. That's what, about 12 hours a week of teaching on average, 10 to 12. So it's not anything massive, but
Mhm.
it's a really healthy income. Obviously, we have some room for growth and we've got some other goals that we're working on. What do you think has been key to this success, especially in the marketing and growing the studio? What has worked the best for you? What's been the biggest impact in the studio? If you were going to give advice to another flute teacher, for example, what would you tell them they should be doing to grow the studio quicker?
I think having there's a couple of things. The biggest thing for me, maybe not necessarily for growth of this studio, but growth of me running my studio, is just having that community of people to surround you and to ask questions. And don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't do it alone because you don't have to do it alone. It can get lonely at times being a single teacher teaching kids all week at home, not leaving the apartment for days on end. So just having that community of other teachers around you to support you, and for you to support and bounce ideas off of, that's been really really beneficial to me. And then in terms of me, how I've personally grown the studio is building those relationships with band directors specifically in the area, and not just band directors in the area but online, and getting students from Facebook groups and things like that. But for me, that hasn't worked as well for me as the band director referral partnership, because you're able to scratch their back and help them out because they need it. As a former band director, they need the help, they want the help. So don't be afraid to reach out and offer your assistance and just be there for them too.
That's awesome. And sharing those resources too means that Everyone benefits, right? The students benefit, the band directors benefit, and then of course you benefit when we grow the studio.
Mhm.
But you're very involved in a lot of these programs now. You're not just teaching students individually, you're not just going in once a semester, but you're working with them for marching band and doing additional coaching. What are some of the things that you have upcoming this semester with some of these schools that you'll be involved with a little bit more directly?
So I'm working with a high school marching band in the area. It's actually my first year with this group in particular. I've worked with a bunch of groups in the area. A fun perk about working with this one is it's my husband's school, so I get to see my husband at work
Oh,
too.
fun.
So I'm working with a marching band their whole season. We've already done 3 weeks of camp, and then we have 3 more months to go for competitions and rehearsals. So that's one very big thing that I'm doing. But other than that, I with a couple of other schools in the area, I already have visits set up for the very beginning of the year to help their beginners specifically, because they're not flute players, and teaching beginners on flute and any instrument, but flute in particular, can be challenging. So there's one school literally 5 minutes down the road. I'm going to spend a couple weeks with them because they have over 100 beginners this year, which is huge for them.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's awesome. And obviously, those are all great places for us to not only be involved with the schools, but to be directly in front of potential students, which definitely helps things. And 'tis the season for brand new instrumentalists, so it's a really, really good opportunity for us to be in front of them and to have those connections, not just now, but obviously those are teachers that you know in the future. And so I'm sure there's already been talks of going in later in the year and things like that too. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. If you had to give a rough estimate about how many schools in your area right now do you have some kind of connection with that you've talked to them in the last year, been involved with their program in some way, shape, or form, even just exchanged resources or ideas with those teachers, do you have a number in mind?
Oh gosh. That's a great question. There's a lot of schools in my area. I'm very fortunate to live in an area in my state where the music programs are fabulous and there's a ton of them. So I would say, I mean, just high school wise, probably 10 plus, and then
Awesome.
double that for the middle schools. That might be a high estimate, but somewhere around there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it's something that we've worked really hard to grow those relationships. They're not all going to answer, right? There's plenty of other schools in your area that you're not connected to. Either they didn't need the help or they're good to go for now and maybe we'll be in contact with them another time. That's totally fine. But building those relationships really can create a stable and steady long relationship. They're not just filling your studio immediately, right? But I'm sure some of those you talked to last fall and they're still referring students to you now at the end of the summer, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That long-term growth and relationship really does make an impact.
hmm
Jumping back, and this was again so long ago, but jumping back a little over a year, what made you decide to do business with us to join this outside the box program?
I think I may have touched on this a little bit already, but I ultimately decided to do it because I didn't want to do it alone. And I knew I couldn't do it alone. And so, we connected on Facebook and we had that initial call and you gave me that easy to follow process. And um, I ultimately decided, like, I was a little hesitant at first. I was like, wow, this is a big commitment. It's a lot of time. But I decided, like, now is the time. Why wait? If I wait, it's only going to be harder later. So I might as well do it now. And I'm glad I did because it clearly has worked out. So yeah.
That's awesome. Do you feel like this is something that you would recommend to other people? Let's say they're going into the second to last year, the last year of their school program. It could be master's, it could be undergrad. Was it manageable to balance them together? Do you think it was worthwhile? I mean, it is a unique situation that you decided to dive into that over the course of the school year. Should other people do that? And if so, how and why?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely recommend it. It's going to be hard. I mean, being in school is hard to begin with. That
Yeah,
everyone knows that. So it will be a little challenging, but the challenge is worth it in the end. Because then you're not scrambling after you graduate, trying to figure out what you're doing next. So you're setting yourself up for success before you get there. So yeah, absolutely.
absolutely. Who do you think is a good fit for this program? If you had to maybe say an ideal client for this program, who would that be?
Anybody who is ready to put the work in and to build their own studio from any walk of life, whether you're still in college, whether you're 20 years out of college and you're ready to do it, any walk of life, I think would be a good fit. Anybody who's ready to start today.
Absolutely. Okay, one final question before we kind of wrap things up for the day. And I so appreciate how open you've been and willing to share a lot of great details about the studio. If you had to give one parting piece of advice, something for any musician that's looking at starting a studio, either from scratch or maybe they've got a couple students already, what would you say has just been the number one key to success that you would want to impart with them?
Have a community of people around you to support you and to bounce ideas off of. Don't feel like you have to sit in your studio at home and figure it out by yourself, because there's so many people out there who have the experience, that are willing to help and want to help. So have that community for sure.
Awesome. We do this with our own music education, right? Like we go to school and we have a weekly lesson time and we go and we we lean on a studio and we lean on a teacher. And it's really similar for this too. It's kind of the environment that we're going for where it's a studio of studios. Everyone's working together. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And I know it's been a really big part of your success, but you've also have been really involved in that community. And that
Mhm.
makes a difference too. It's okay to have the community, but then if you don't use it, it's not going to go anywhere. So you've done such a good job of not only asking questions, but being involved, being supportive, meeting other people, and really enjoying that additional benefit. So thanks for being such a great part of our program and our community. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
So proud of you and all the success and growth that you've had. I know that there's a lot more to come. This is just the beginning, since now we are free of the school timelines and we've got a lot more flexibility. So I know that coming, in the next few months, we've got a lot of growth, which is gonna be really exciting to see. If
Mhm.
someone did want to find out about your studio, where could they locate you on the internet?
I have a studio website, which is samanthagoes.mymusicstaff.com. Or you can follow my studio on Instagram. It's just at Goes Flute Studio.
Perfect. Samantha puts out a lot of good content. She's great on Instagram about consistently putting things out on stories and sharing student success. So it's a really good follow. A lot of good things if you're looking for some inspiration on your own studio content too. She's really creative, and that would be a great follow as well. All right. Thank you again, Samantha. I really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone for watching, and have a great rest of your day.